All right, I don't have any slides, and I'm going to try to be snappy, and I'm going to try to give you as much, hopefully, new or different things that I can say from the perspective of a company that I think lives most of our time actually at those R&D tipping points and has to engage with pretty much all of the questions that have been outlined so far today on pretty much a constant basis. So the first thing that I want to highlight for you is that my reaction to the ethics as a framework proposals that I've heard today is overwhelmingly positive. In the ETICA materials, the question was sort of raised about whether industry would react to this as, oh no, yet another set of regulation. But my reaction has been that what we find is that we have so many disparate, disconnected discussions and engagements about various issues and topics, each of which has a different ethical principle at its heart. And it's actually, I think, more than anything, the lack of bringing together and unifying and normalizing those conversations and those frameworks that creates the most burden on us. I mean, I might, for example, just call out, privacy is one framework, free expression is another framework, and safety is another framework. Each of those conversations for us tends to happen with a different set of stakeholders. Each one is invoking a deeply held ethical principle, but each conversation in isolation is not necessarily the way forward to, the most healthy, overarching system of how we're going to run our societies and how we're going to adapt to these things. So I, find myself very enthusiastic and very, very supportive of seeing ethics as this fundamental underlying question really take center stage. To whatever degree that can happen, I would love to see it. I would also comment that seeing that become more normalized as a process for corporations, I think, would be a relief to us. Ethical discussions are something that happens every day, all the time, inside Google. And our experience of talking about that externally has, in fact, been mixed. I think this may actually be stronger in the United States, but for everyone who is pleased and relieved to hear us try to provide more transparency about how we address and grapple with ethical questions, there will be another set of people who may be furious to hear a corporation even suggest that it may have an ethical component at all and is not, in fact, just a giant profit-generating robot. So having a sort of normalization of the process by which we as a corporation could be transparent about how we address ethics would, I think, also be a relief and be useful to us. Now, I'd like to move on to touch briefly on the list of emerging ICT that came out of the ETICA and emphasize a couple of things from the perspective that I see. So one of the emerging technologies that has been mentioned a number of times is the whole robotics and artificial intelligence and ambient intelligence. I began my scientific career as an artificial intelligence researcher, and these are topics that have actually been very, very relevant to my work at Google. So I wanted to tease out and highlight, I think, one important thing about those areas that has a lot of implications for the ethical questions. And that's that traditionally in artificial intelligence, the way that researchers and scientists conceptualized it was very much as one of intentionally and explicitly crafting this sort of working model of some kind of cognitive entity, like building a little scale model somehow of a human mind, of a human that would then function in this intelligent way. But what we have found and what we have seen is that that's not actually what artificial intelligence looks like at all, really, that model seems to have been fairly limited. And instead, the enormous artificial intelligence breakthroughs have been basically recycled human intelligence in a very emergent kind of a way, not an intentionally crafted way, but in an emergent take all of this observational data from all of these humans doing intelligent things and feed that through this very large, complex, ultimately somewhat unpredictable system to allow the system to behave in ways that are smart. And that has been an extremely powerful technique for creating informational tools like Google, and it raises any number of ethical questions. And so I spend a lot of time discussing what that means about in terms of data collection. But one of the things that I want to highlight for you is that when you have a large, powerful informational tool, sort of artificial intelligence, that is built from recycling all of this human intelligence, it also tends to recycle the uglier parts of humanity, right? You know, the great mass of humanity's intelligence that is being recycled there, you know, is not a saintly one. And so questions arise of how this tool that provides the power of this recycled intelligence, how this tool will also reify, you know, the hatreds and the prejudices and the biases. And then how one should properly correct against those things without sliding down that slippery slope into, you know, too much censorship, into, you know, reifying your own biases. And I think that these are very far-reaching questions and will continue to be so. Related to this, I also wanted to highlight, because I saw a lot of discussion of, you know, the smart environment, where we will be surrounded by all different kinds of data collection all the time, which I think is an important thing to highlight. But I also want to highlight the increasing role of the individual as the active agent of data capture and data processing, especially as mobile phones and mobile devices become more and more powerful and are able to do more and more interesting data capture and data processing, linking back to centralized sources of data. Again, I think you have here a slightly similar principle, which is that there can be a healthy focus on whether there will be some institutional abuse by large centralized organizations. But as our technology pushes more and more powerful resources into the hands of every individual, more and more questions come up about the individual use of those powers. And one of the, just to make that concrete for you, one of the examples that we have grappled with a lot within Google and that we have tried to grapple with publicly so that we could get more people into the ethical conversation was the possibility of facial recognition on cell phones, right, through cell phone cameras, as being something where, you know, this is potentially a cool and interesting and useful technology, but, you know, boy, does it also have the potential to be a, you know, a stalker's enabling tool. And what does it mean to look at how this technology should be deployed in a responsible way so that the right kinds of protections are in place. Finally, I would like to sort of take up presume on the invitation to kind of offer my personal wish list to the ethics development community here. So one was that a lot of the ethical frameworks that are out there that I'm aware of and that have been invoked somewhat in the discussion so far have been very research focused, right? The medical research ethical frameworks and ethical you know, best practices and standardized processes to follow is sort of the, you know, the immediate touchstone to be thought of. One of the things about Google is that compared to some of our predecessor companies, we don't find a very meaningful distinction between research and development. It's, you know, the development is research and the research is development for us a lot of the time. And so I would, if people were willing to do so, I would love to see some direct addressing of, does that make a meaningful difference? Is there something that's important about whether, if that's going to be the case, does that make the ethical framework that one would want to operate within different in some way? And then finally, if we look at these questions by looking at all of this is being embedded in societies that are themselves large, complex systems that reach some sort of equilibrium that we can all live with. The question of, in the face of all this technological change, whether we will want to readdress what literacy means, I think is an important one, right? Because I look back historically and think about just how disruptive and upsetting the development of the printing press must have been, right? There must have been the equivalence of all of the same kinds of, how will we deal with this upheaval in society, sorts of groups trying to work through all of this. And part of that settled on the idea that in a healthy participant democracy, citizen literacy was a necessary, important enabling good, meaning the ability to read and write so that you would participate in the ways in which the society organizes itself through communication. Is there an updated equivalent of that we should be striving for in this world where so many things are so impacted by very complex systems of government, systems of finance, systems of information technology, and how might we update that? Thank you.